Conversations with Agents of Change, the podcast where we sit down with people who are quietly and sometimes loudly reshaping system, narratives, and lives. Today's conversation is about voice, about who gets to speak, who gets listened to, and who has to fight just to be seen as deserving of rights. I'm joined by Ola Sobieraj, a community organizer, a project manager, immigration advisor, bilingual advocate, trainer, facilitator, and interpreter. Ola currently works as a project manager and community organizer at the 3 Million, the largest grassroots organization for the US citizens in the UK. The 3 Million was formed after the 2016 referendum, not to debate Brexit, but to protect people, to make sure that those who have made the UK their home can live with dignity, security, and an equal voice in society. Ola's work sits right at the intersection of policy, people, and power. She works with communities who are often navigating fear, uncertainty, language barriers, and complex systems, and she helps turn those obstacles into collective action. We consider Ola an agent of change because she doesn't just help people survive systems, she works to change them from the ground up. Ola, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start with you. Before the titles, before all the projects and all the experience that you have, what first drew you to work with migrants and access to justice?
Well, I am a migrant myself. I came to Northern Ireland just over 25 years ago. And at that time, I was the only Polish girl in Macrofelt, in the town that I came to. And I've had a really, really positive experience. I was welcomed and I was looked after and I was cherished. And I suppose a little bit later in Poland and other countries joined the EU and more people started arriving kind of all at the same time. It seemed to be quite a new thing for Northern Ireland and certainly for the town that I was living in. And I noticed that the people who arrived did not have the same experience as I did. So I tried to help them navigate that new reality. And I also tried to bring people together. So we all have that good experience. So everybody felt just as looked after and just as welcome as I did when I first arrived.
That's amazing. I'm a migrant myself, and I think I was very lucky that when I arrived, there were more people behind me, so it wasn't as new. I was the very first Mexican in the area, so that was definitely, at least in Castle Dawson, I had a very nice welcoming experience. Whether I know there's many others that haven't been as fortunate. What I'm really hearing is that it wasn't very abstract to work with migrants. It was very personal and it was embodied and lived. And it sounds like you once saw how the system can affect people's everyday lives, so it became impossible to look away. Was there a moment when you realized this isn't just about helping people? It's about changing the circumstances, the structures.
It was very much sort of an evolution and it developed over time because my background is in linguistics and I initially was teaching English to people, but I very quickly noticed that overcoming the language barriers is not enough, and people were asking just practical questions. So that kind of brought me to helping people navigate the realities. But that also brought with it new challenges. So with overcoming one barrier, another barrier came. And if it wasn't once for individuals, there were for families and there were for communities. And not always barriers, maybe challenges, because once sort of those basic needs were addressed, then people had different needs and they wanted to, sort of realize their ambitions, their dreams and achieve things. And again, different systems needed to be navigated. So I think that really kept evolving, so from individual level to community level. And then at some point, years later, I seem to come across the same issues over and over again in different contexts. And then my attention turned more to trying to really make those barriers go away rather than keep addressing them every time. So from jumping over the hoops to removing hoops, as I like to call it. So probably repeat that all the time somewhere.
That's great because I think it's very, very important, very accurate. I know that you've worked both in the front line by directing individuals from helping them with very specific things like from daily life to migrant services or access to services. So you have also worked on a more strategic and organizational level. You previously managed U.S. settlement scheme support projects What did working on that settlement scheme teach you about how people actually operate in immigration systems?
Well, before I came here to Northern Ireland, I was subject to immigration control, so I still remember that experience of applying for various visas and having a lot of paperwork. But I suppose people were slightly younger than me, and people from other EU countries did not experience that, and they became subject to immigration control overnight, basically, with the arrival of Brexit and with introduction of the EU settlement scheme. So it was a big shock for many, and especially those sort of older EU countries where they never really experienced any need to justify why they want to live somewhere and where they're going, their comings and goings. It's from sort of Eastern and Central Europe, where I suppose we're more used to control in general and sort of state intervening in our lives due to our sort of legacy of communism and the old system pre-1989. But for many, it was something so new that it was really, first of all, they were in defiance. They didn't really want to do that. They didn't understand why they had to. And then for many people, it was really incomprehensible because they've already jumped through so many immigration hoops to be and to assert their life in the UK or in Northern Ireland as well. So they didn't understand why they had to do yet another thing. And it was really quite a stark realization for me that one day I had something, a document that said permanent residence, that's indefinite and unconditional. And overnight that became invalid completely. So with that realization, I thought what it must be like for people who, don't have that kind of background knowledge, who don't know the language, or who arrived just recently and haven't secured their status or settlement. So, and it's still to this day, when it's 5 years after the deadline for applications, there still are many people who did not realize they had to apply based on that permanent residence or on other factors, because maybe they were children at the time, that they still don't really understand the ins and outs of that system and need assistance with regularizing their paperwork. And so that's the people who are subject to that system, but there's also people who needed to start using it to essentially become like an outsourced immigration controllers, like schools, like doctors, like benefit decision makers, and everyone, mortgage brokers and bank workers. So they did not understand that system at all. And it really was from like an advisor point of view, it was like turning the clock by 20 years again. So something that we had to fight for in 2004, we suddenly had to fight for again in 2021. And still, because people are still wanting like visas, stamps, paperwork, and those things don't exist anymore. It's all kind of moved to the cloud and to digital, and it's like a whole new training cycle.
I'm sure that added another layer of difficulty by people who were maybe as literate technology-wise, on top of all the already challenges.
Yeah, very much so, because the government advertised the EU settlement scheme as a simple sort of registration process, and it became anything but, really. Just the registering. The first hurdle was in installing an app onto your phone, and the app was only compatible with certain types of phones. Then you had to have a biometric passport or ID card. It's only later that the sort of those requirements were changed and those apps and systems adapted. But some people were left behind, and again, if somebody was not digitally literate, they had additional problems with accessing the help and the system. And then with the arrival of pandemic, that exacerbated the gap between those who were able to access it and regularize their status and those who didn't. Some then had absences, so immigration rules changed, and there's been, I think, within the 3 million, we counted at least 18 major changes in the guidance and to the systems that made a difference.
Okay.
So from something that was supposed to be a simple registration, it became a hugely complex issues. And I suppose to prove that, then to advise on EU settlement scheme, you need to be a regulated immigration advisor. And initially, in the first 5 years, it was enough to have like a qualification, which was level 1 USS only. Now it's not enough to even have like a full level 1. Most of the applications require level 2 or level 3 because they're late, because there's more kind of explanation and different evidential burden included. We've also noticed that some groups are disproportionately represented among people refused or rejected for applications. We notice there's some racial bias potentially in there, but we can't quite corroborate it because the Home Office do not collect or say they don't collect ethnicity data on those applications. So it is very hard to see what really is going on.
Yeah, and I can only imagine when you're on the migrant side, the uncertainty levels, the fear that we cause, because you all have already started life here and you don't know how is that going to go, if your case is going to be reviewed or if you have to start all over. So it brings a lot of uncertainty for yourself and for the fourth generation, your children and your grandchildren maybe. And so it's not as simple, and I find it very interesting, but at the same time it could be very upsetting in many ways. It sometimes could feel almost like a hostile, that you feel to an extent a bit targeted, and it's very clear to me that one system doesn't fit all. It needs to be more specific in certain areas. What strikes me is how often systems are designed for an imaginary user, that someone who is confident, someone who's fluent, someone who can use a computer or is digital literate. How many real people are excluded by that? And it's just shocking. And it just makes you feel, who was this system designed for? So, how do you hold compassion for individuals while still challenging the system that puts them into an impossible situation?
I think the sort of my history always has been working with real people on the grind. So that's how I start. That's how we start also at the 3 million, with real people and their issues. And then we kind of unpack it or build up on it to design our case for policy for decision makers, not the other way around. Because as you say, we often feel that at the government level, sort of the user or the person comes last, if at all, even though they say they make quality impact assessments or well-being impact assessments or various other assessments, but somehow they definitely start from what suits the government and then work their way down. So we are very much at the 3 million and any other organization that I work with, we're very much in touch with what happens at the grassroots level, where sort of lived experience led, and all of our team have a experience of migration or are EU citizens, and the same with our board. So this is really the core of what we do. So it's impossible to lose track of this lived experience because we all have it. It's all kind of close to our heart, and each of us had some sort of issue with that system at some point in our lives. So we just definitely want to take it beyond solving individual ones to make sure that the system changes and takes a bit of that compassion into account as well.
I agree. I think it's one of those things that is hard to keep focus. Why are you doing things? Because sometimes it just feels like so overwhelming to see that the change is not happening fast enough. But needless to say, that is a very plausible. I'm very proud of what you guys are doing, because it's changing the future of many people, and it's changing the present of many others as well. So yes, it's amazing. Let's talk about the 3 million, because I think what makes this organization so powerful is that it's for and of migrants. And instead of others speaking on behalf of the EU citizens, the 3 million creates space for people that speak for themselves. From your perspective, why is migrant led organizing so important?
It is really important because that lived experience gives people passion to get their issue sorted, but also often compassion to see other people in the same way, even if their particular issue is slightly different or if they're from a different background. And there's a huge, really untapped into people. It's a huge source of people power, and it's only people power that can create change. And it's people who experience issues that have enough motivation and tenacity to actually shake things up, because they might have less to lose or a lot more to gain. But a lot of the time we can see that people who have sorted their issue with, sort of with either our help or along the way, they do join our campaigning effort, because then they realize that, there's, still a lot to do, and there's, other areas of campaigning or of policy that need change. And it's that sense of agency and empowerment stays with them along the way. So that's how the 3 million started, with a group of frustrated EU citizens who just did not agree with what was happening to us, and they decided to do something about it. So rather than wait until it's done for us, and in that spirit we have continued. So the issues may have changed slightly in some things. We've had a lot of wins, but there's still many things that remain to be done, and digital status and e-visa. And from the start, we were trying to achieve a physical backup to the digital immigration status, and that has been our kind of flagship campaign and flagship policy ask from the start. It has evolved with the environment, but it is still kind of the big picture. Even though time and time again the government has opposed it, has rejected it, so we've adapted, we've changed, we offer different solutions. If that was the only issue we campaign on, we would be probably all burnt out and deflated by now, because it's been a no after no after no. But because we also took on board, other things that bothered people or that did not seem right in how they implement the withdrawal agreement, and we had wins along the way, and we saw how the wins impact individual people's lives, but also how being involved impacts people's lives. That's what keeps us going, and that's what keeps other people going. So
That's really good. That is a very important insight, that sometimes when we only focus on the negatives or on the no's, you can lose sight altogether of why you're doing it. Whereas if you celebrate even the smallest win, that can keep you fueled enough to keep going. And I think that's very important. There's something deeply political and deeply human about saying we don't need to be translated to be by someone else to be valid. It feels like your work is not only about rights, it's about the restoring an agency, is trying to get help people in many, many ways, in many, many phases. So I think that's very inspiring.
yeah, I think that we're all agents of change in many ways. It's not a job. It's not a skill that you can learn. Everybody has that in them. So it's just whenever the need for action activates, and sometimes showing people or modeling, how to take action is enough. An example, if we created a peer support group for people who with precarious immigration status due to their absences. And then at the start, they were really so scared to even turn the camera on during a Zoom meeting, because they did not really want to draw attention to themselves, but at the same time, they had a really deep need to talk and to connect with other people who had that same issue. And over the 8 months now of that group continuing, quite a few went from that fear to writing to their MP about their individual story, to meeting their MP and asking the MP to write to the minister and intervene on their behalf. Some have secured their status since because of the recent changes, and those continue on the campaigning side, and that they campaign for other issues. But it's been really amazing to see this courage growing and their kind of discovery and how it made them feel to see the change happen in real time. So it's really been hugely rewarding. And
Absolutely.
at the last group meeting, I asked what they were grateful for in last year and what they're hoping for this year. And then I said that for me, it's really been sort of that group and seeing the impact and their journey and how they felt about themselves and their status and their place in the UK as their home rather than somewhere to be fearful of. That's the sort of thing that keeps me going as well.
Absolutely. And that's like really inspiring, and it's very heartwarming. What changes when people from being service users to being organizers, advocates, and leaders? How can they just move from one to the other?
I think they need to see that they have a certain either a little bit of anger at their situation and discomfort about, the status quo, and they need to know what it is that they would like to change and what they would like to do, and they need a little bit of help or direction in terms of, how to direct that anger towards their goal, which generally means breaking it up in small steps, right? So if I told the people in April, by October you'll be meeting your MP and, and speaking in Parliament about your problem, they would be like, no, this is not for me. I am not that kind of person. But because we broke it down into sharing the story with closed camera, the first time we can write to MP, we can support you and help you, we can provide a template, and then we organize some events that everybody's free to join into. Then they saw other people from previous campaigns maybe sharing their experience and their stories, and there were people like them who started off as somebody who had problem with their status, and now a year later they're speaking in the House of Lords or at a round table with MPs about that issue. It's the small steps, but every small step and every action
It's very important.
is very important, and it's I think
For
having a plan.
Yes, especially for themselves, because I think is that self-confidence is they're growing in the belief in themselves that yes, I need to fight for this and I need to learn the skills, or I need to just be brave enough to speak up and to surround myself with the right people. So I think that's very relevant. And we often hear the phrase access to justice, but it sounds very abstract. From your work, what does access to justice actually look like in someone's real everyday life?
Access to justice is really access to everything and anything. So it might be being able to secure your immigration status, knowing about your rights. That's, I think, the starting point. Having this education that is sort of paralegal, nearly education about your rights, and having the feeling like you're entitled to any rights at all. Because often I meet people or migrants who don't have that. They feel like second-class citizens, even though maybe nobody ever treated them like that. They just feel like, this is not my country, this is not my house, so I need to follow the rules, and I don't want to put my head above the parapet. So breaking that barrier and making people like they belong, or fostering that belonging to even seek their rights. That's what I see as access to justice. But also bringing kind of the legal profession and making legal rights and legal knowledge less exclusive and less elitist. So people generally do know about their rights and have easy ways of accessing and challenging any decisions that they don't agree with, and they don't have fear of doing so. That's what I would see as access to justice. In this particular migration sector, everything starts with your immigration status. So access to immigration advice is very much related to access to justice and every other area of life. And in Northern Ireland in particular, it's something that is missing. It's in great shortage, and it's not very accessible because it's not funded. And when it's in the private domain, then obviously people find it hard to afford, because it's such a new thing in Northern Ireland in the grand scheme of things. Immigration advice is something that's been here for maybe 20 years. And the last 10 more so. So there's not many firms and not many lawyers who do it readily, and the quality of the service also varies a lot.
Of course, yes. I love how you grounded that as is justice is not just about what happens like in the courtroom or on the letters. It's just about the clarity and the dignity and to feel safe and to try to feel that you understand what's going on, what's your situation, what's your condition under these laws. It sounds like access to justice is also very much like an emotional labor. So it's about carrying that fear that you mentioned, that shame, I suppose, or it's exhaustion. So it is a very complex topic from different angles. How do you support people emotionally while navigating such a high stakes systems?
Navigating any kind of legal issues that people might have, or any problems in life, takes emotional toll on them, and if you're an advisor, it also takes emotional toll on yourself. So it is important to be attentive to your own nervous system, and allow feelings and emotion into the environment, to create a safe space so people feel free to share or not share. And also I'm really lucky that sort of my working environment and the team, this is very much at the core as well, to I focus on humanity. So that's what's important. See people before you see any issues, and they're human and not just statistics. So that's a simple example of somebody suggested that we could, really improve the speed with which we answer like the help desk emails. But then we really insist on doing it in a very, very personal and personalized way. So that takes a little bit more
Of
time.
course, yeah.
But it pays huge dividends, because then people do want to get involved with our work. And quite often from those people who first contact us via the help desk, then they become volunteers or they become involved. They kind of continue on our journey with us, and we continue on their journey with them. So I think that kind of personal and human touches at any opportunity and every step of the way is really, really important.
And it's very important what you said, because it's about building that connection. It's not just a number, it's not an email, it's not a faceless name. It's a person, it's a story, it's someone who's there, and you want to get involved with that person from a volunteer perspective or from an advocacy perspective. I feel that nowadays we are disconnecting very much to each other, and we see problems as them. But when we don't know them, we usually just are not as empathic as if we knew who they are and what are their struggles, and we are able to see their story in a more empathic and soft way. So I believe that's very important that we keep connecting with each other. At Conversations with Agents of Change, we don't see change only as a big public moment. We see it in persistent, relational, and often invisible work. Ola, we consider you an agent of change because you help people reclaim their voice in systems designed to silence them. You translate complexity into possibility. You shift power from institution back to communities, and you center lived experience as expertise. When you hear the phrase agent of change, does it resonate with you or does it feel uncomfortable?
When you first mentioned that, and when anybody says anything like that about me, I thought like, oh gosh, but I haven't achieved anything big, like any particular change. If anything, I was always a part of an organization who maybe helped achieve change. So when it's personal about me, I feel I don't deserve it. But when I look back at bits and pieces that I've done, I can definitely say I've made change to many people's lives on an individual level. So that adds up, and I've had my impact here and there. So I'm starting to embrace it a little bit more.
But I'm glad,
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that, because I think it has happened to all of us that we don't believe that what we do is good enough or big enough or relevant enough. But the fact that we are showing up and we are doing things, even if they are small in the great scale of things, research or politics or whatever it is, the fact that we care and the fact that we are putting things together and people together, I think that's very, very important. We are fighting apathy and we are just standing up and say, look, this is what we need to do. And even if it's one person at a time, I think that is very, very relevant. Talking to you reminds me that change is not only about who we are, it's about the places we work with, the places we collaborate with, the people, the organizations, the connections that we build. We cannot thrive by ourselves. You cannot get enough impact just by yourself. But the fact that we choose to work or collaborate with certain people or certain organizations, and that doesn't take away from our effort. I mean, those organizations can be great, but maybe they wouldn't have had as big impact if we weren't there. I've seen that through your work, that you can achieve, you can help to get a lot of impact by who you are rather than who you work for or who you work with. It's more about who you are and how you live your life and how you connect with others. So I think that's very important to point out here. I want to touch that back. You were saying something that really clicked with me when you say that sometimes we need to create connections. So we need to put things in place for them to feel inspired enough for them to act. Like when you were saying that example about the people that might not even want to turn the camera on, But then with that encouragement and that safe space to be able to be themselves, and they might feel encouraged enough to speak up and to be who they are. So that facilitation of strength and courage is in itself a characteristic of an agent of change, because it's not just you accessing change, is bringing people along with you and inspiring others, which I think is very important. And I think that's exactly what your work does. So you are dealing with fear, injustice, bureaucracy, and real human consequences. What helps you keep going when the system feels slow?
The human, the connections and the relationships that definitely help, because that's something that is developing whether change happens or not. There's really no stagnation, if you like, and also those relationships do need maintained. So we keep each other going. I think was whenever somebody loses a little bit of hope, or maybe faces a bit of a burnout or some challenges, then there's somebody else who has good news or higher vibes at the time. So I think the sector and community, we keep each other going in the face of adversity on the decision maker or policy side. And it's maybe a controversial thing to say, but conflict keeps you going as well, because sort of challenges are motivating there a lot of the time. And for me personally, I do find that I function better in crisis than when everything is going well. So a lot of the time it's quite positive that when you have that challenge and you can't do something, it sort of keeps you motivated as well, rather than just makes you give up. Apart from all the kind of other practicalities, we're just so used to keep going or just keep going.
Yes.
Until sometimes it's nearly too late and people do get burnt out, and it is, we need to be careful not to get to that. As women, I think we have that drive that we just keep going no matter what, and it's actually harder to take a step back to say, oh no, I don't have the strength or the energy or something to keep going anymore. We just do, right?
Absolutely. What do you think gives hope right now to people when it comes to migrant rights and justice in the UK?
It's very hard to have hope right now. The political climate and narrative have been horrendous and terrifying. Just the narrative of the small boats and people seeking refuge has been dominating the media in the past year, and then suddenly overnight it turned to people with indefinite leave to remain. And I think that was a huge shock to a lot of people, that they thought again was permanent and unconditional, and they were safe, that could potentially be taken away from them overnight, and for reasons that have not been clearly defined or justified. So we try to foster that hope and positivity by feeling of community, building communities, and trying to just work together, or spending as much time and kind of with like-minded people, because otherwise it really is hard to have hope in the face that rhetoric that is leveling down, and it's a race downwards rather than making that things being better. I think people had a lot of hope, and there was a lot of hope ahead of the Labour governments with the last general election in the UK, when Labour was about to take government. But that first year has been nothing hopeful for migrants and for people from ethnic minorities and various other minorities.
Yes. Is there something you would like to add up here, as not as a question, but something that you want to say, that you feel passionate about?
I think over the years, I've become more and more passionate about not only my feeling of that I belong and I live my life here and it's comfortable, good, but also about creating that feeling for other people, and also working with local people to challenge them if they don't feel like it. And over the years, I've realized and understood that even though we might have rights, even though we might be able to access them or not, we don't really have much representation among the decision makers or in certain organizations that then impact our lives. So this is something I'm really passionate about, and dedicated to work towards changing, so that we're more visible, and I suppose especially in Northern Ireland, when we're in that other category, that really irks me, and I'm passionate about it in a maybe slightly negative way, but it's this thing that irks me, and therefore something that I probably will continue to work to change. And so I would encourage everyone, migrants and people from whatever we want to call ourselves, because it's like, well, I've been here for 25 years, I'm not a migrant anymore, right? But at the same time, I am. So as they say, you'll always be a blow-in, right? Whether you're from 5 miles down the road or 5,000 miles down the road. So I would like to change that mentality, that you don't remain a blow-in forever, that at some point you can call yourself local and nobody will bat an eyelid. And they will maybe stop asking you where you're from and all that. I think that's important. I just want to be kind of a proud Polish person, a proud migrant, and I want other people to see me like that as well, and I want them to be interested and curious about my culture and your culture, and for it not to be something just an exotic, and so you don't have to wear a national costume to be recognized, but that appreciation be two-way and like truly embraced for different cultures living alongside each other, so without necessarily the need to assimilation and without this exotic zoo mentality for multicultural events sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. Are there any other projects that are involved at the moment?
Yes, for a long time I also was approached by Polish community. I never worked specifically with Polish community in any of the support organizations or schools, but lately I got more involved on that front, trying to bring different Polish organizations together, but also to really highlight the Polish community is the biggest minority, biggest organized community in Northern Ireland with around 30,000 people.
Wow.
And to bring the political leaders' attention to that, also untapped voting power potentially, because more and more people maybe naturalize and get citizenship, which makes them eligible to vote in general election, but certainly everybody's eligible to vote in the local election. So to making that connection, and again to foster this idea that it's not the two main Northern Irish communities, but there are other groups and other communities, and just with the example of Polish one being the biggest, working for, we've set up the Friends of Poland, and it's an all-party parliamentary group. It's not political, it has a buy-in from all political parties, and it's really a group of MLAs who foster the connection with the Polish community here. So we've had a couple of events, for example, a community day in Stormont, which was really good. So that was the first time many of the Polish community groups or schools have ever been to Stormont, and so that was their first contact with the decision makers and how power and any power structure and government structure here. We work closely with the Polish consul as well to foster those relationships, and so far it's positive, and so far as everybody's happy to host us and embrace this cultural side. So we're hoping to build on that and make the political circles and parties like really truly curious about the potential that migrant communities, on the example of Polish ones, might offer, and also make people interested in getting involved politically a little bit more. From voting, the election is coming up next year in 2027, so hopefully some parties will be encouraged to approach migrants to stand for them, or to even recruit to be in the party, or to even canvass with specific kind of communities and cultures in mind, even via having translated information on their website, and being aware that so many languages are spoken here and so many cultures are here. So this is like another pet project. This
Sounds
is
exciting.
yeah, it's great because it really, there's 10 Polish supplementary schools where the children of all ages learn Polish. Those children go to uni. They're also trying to set up a Polish student association between Queen's and UU. Every other part of the UK has an abundance of Polish student societies, so it'd be great to have one here. There's so many professionals that are Polish or from other migrant backgrounds, so I'd like to bring them together as well, aside from the support and advice sector, because that sector is quite prominent, but there's also other professionals, there's lawyers, doctors, lots of tech and IT people, and we want to build that side of the community as well, because I think quite often for people to be successful and to feel at home, they maybe not assimilated, but they did not, actively embrace their heritage, if not actively avoided mentioning it. So depending on how they felt, I really would like to bring that out in people to celebrate their heritage while still being, completely feeling like they're locals and they're successful. So it wouldn't take anything away from them.
That sounds really exciting. I would like to see and follow what the development of that. Thank you for your honesty, your clarity, and the work you do every day, often behind the scenes, to make justice more accessible and more human. This conversation reminds me that change doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like explaining a letter, or translating a form, or creating a space for someone to speak, or insisting that lived experience matters. And that kind of change is deeply transformative. If you're listening and want to learn more about the 3 million migrant led organization or how to support access to justice, we'll share the links on the show notes. Ola, thank you for being an agent of change.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you and being an agent of change.
This podcast is produced by the Change Impact Group.